So, Kelsie, how did you first come across magic, and how did that look? What was magic then?
That is a very interesting question because it depends a lot on how you define magic, obviously. Because um, there was a lot of stuff that I realized in retrospect that I was doing somewhat intuitively as a kid. And I think that's really
Sure.
common for children, right? Like, there's a lot of just intuitive, the world is magic, so you do magic things with it. Um,
Well, that's it, because you know no better, I suppose. You just assume that,
yeah, you haven't been taught not to yet, right?
yeah.
So the but I guess my first exposures to it in a sense of this is something maybe I would engage with was probably in the early 2000s.
Okay.
Um, Maybe just a touch before that. I started poking around at Christian mysticism
Okay.
and things started getting weird around the edges of my at the time like
Were you coming from a Christian background, was it, or did you just randomly stumble upon Christian mysticism?
yes, no, I was definitely coming out of a very interesting and pretty not uncommon, but still, when I talk to other people, pretty unusual evangelical upbringing um, in the central U.S. And it was a very strange blend for me because my parents were very much into the Christian mysticism, like um, at least my dad was to some extent. Um, but also my dad was very into broader world culture stuff.
Okay.
So we were a lot less insular in some ways than other evangelical
All
kids
right,
that
right,
I've
right. Yeah.
ex evangelical kids I've talked to. Um, but like I was homeschooled until eighth grade to kind of shelter me.
Okay.
Me and my younger brothers were sheltered intentionally from the like
The big bad world.
yeah, the big bad world, the public school system that was out to indoctrinate people into evolution being real. And
God forbid,
yeah,
literally.
I know, right? Exactly. Um, and it's really weird to talk about, but like my dad was also like they were
Oh,
hippies.
right.
They came into evangelical Christianity out of late hippie Jesus movement
Wow, wow,
stuff,
wow.
which
That's
was
cool.
um yeah, so they came into it from the weird semi-mystical rock and roll Christianity,
Right.
um, which is not super broadly known these days. It's one of those things you pretty much only really know much about it if you're connected to that culture in some
Yeah,
way.
yeah, yeah.
Um, and it's all gotten commodified now. Like there was actually kind of an interesting shift in the 70s and into the early 80s that eventually got, commodified and subsumed into the overall evangelical bleh.
Is it like a dirty, dark secret, a past kind of thing that it's not talked about, swept under the carpet, or is it
Well,
still kind of
it's more
open?
like it's been taken and just like subverted into this big time like it's been added and like hijacked into the control mechanisms of the culture, right?
Oh, okay. Right,
So
right, right.
so many of those people were, even though they identified as Christians, they were rebels and trying to change Christian culture at the time in the
All right.
U.S. It's a really odd, weird little history thing that I should probably write a blog about at some point.
You should, because if from an outsider's point of view, the whole kind of American Christianity is like, because it's so different from the Christianity we get over here, like, and it
Oh yeah,
has an awful lot kind of more disparate areas that little sex is probably not the wrong word because that implies cult, which is probably might be the right word, but kind of different pockets.
well, they're definitely. I mean, sects is a correct word, I
Right.
think. Honestly, my parents use that about other like denominations. Like they actually considered Catholicism to be like a perversion of the original
Sure.
Christianity. Like very, very, it is very unique perspective to come into things from, especially because I got exposed to people like C.S. Lewis and
All right.
Tolkien hugely. Um, and then Madeline L'Engle, who's also, she wrote, I don't know, she's not probably as well known worldwide, but um, she was writing science fiction with like creepy, weird angels and stuff.
Oh, right. Okay. Okay.
Um, yeah, and she seemed to have some kind of, in retrospect, she's got something weird going on in her imaginal stuff.
Right. Okay.
But yeah, and she's pretty neat. But her stuff is, there's like time travel and stuff in it too that's done with magic basically.
All right.
So
That seems quite open
there
for
were
a kind
these
of a
little,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. It seems
Well, and there's all these little weird mystical magical things because like Lewis and Tolkien both obviously had a huge influence on wanting to re-enchant the
sure.
culture around them,
Yeah.
and that re-enchantment really caught me. That desire for the world to be more magical than it was being presented to me as.
Right.
Um,
Right. Okay.
and that actually continued. It's kind of interesting because most people who I know who come into magic, they get like a lot of them have gone through an early Christian phase and then had like an atheist or serious agnostic phase and then come back and pursued like something like, it's like almost like the atheism is a reaction against the problems in the predominant Christian cultures that we've got going on, right?
Yeah, and I think it's also the kind of the individuation of the person as well.
Yeah.
It's the
Oh yeah,
the polar
absolutely.
opposites to discover who you are, and it's like why people join the Church of Satan
Yeah.
or enjoy Satanism. That same kind of impulse. So you were saying you started getting into the kind of Christian mysticism. So what did that kind of look like? What was what
Well,
was that? Like what?
amusingly, in retrospect, some of it looks a lot like some of the Catholic mystical practices where you pray a lot and really try to learn to speak with God internally, right?
Okay.
Um, and then I had this weird point in time because I was having a bunch of identity issues connected to this because this was not okay as far as my family and most of my culture that immediately surrounded me, my subculture, told me.
Yeah.
So the interesting thing is that the reason that I attribute ultimately to me getting into magic is because of a kind of, from a magical perspective, it's a really intense prayer to Yeshua. And I like to say Yeshua rather than Jesus because I don't really consider myself a Christian exactly anymore. Like I still have
Okay.
elements of that, but I also work with Hecate and all kinds of other um, non-Christian spirits.
Yeah.
Um, and but the prayer was asking him to, I don't know what's wrong with me. I don't know why I'm not connecting to this church. Please, whatever it takes, even if it means breaking me and my life, show me the path that I need to be on.
That's quite brave.
It is. And like because I was in desperation. Like I was suicidal pretty seriously. Um,
Okay.
I was not ready to like release the idea. I wasn't going to become a materialist.
Was there, when you say not to become a materialist, was that in defiance, or you were just satisfied that materialism was wrong, or what was?
It was kind of a combination, actually.
Right.
Because at the time I definitely had this feeling, because I had interactions with supernatural forces in bits and pieces throughout my life.
Okay.
Um, like when I was 8 or 9, I almost drowned in a waterfall alone in the woods, and someone
Okay.
pulled me out who wasn't there, and I've engaged with that person as my first like major spiritual patron, actually.
Okay. Okay.
And
Cool.
she's a goddess of water and waterfalls.
Right.
Um,
And so, do you think that that relationship started because of the incident, or did it, was that kind of how you were introduced? Like, was that kind of your introduction to this relationship that had previously gone, or how do you think?
I have not settled on a single answer for that yet, honestly, and I'm not sure I ever will.
Okay. Okay.
Um,
Right.
I'm not sure where the causation lies in that particular experience. It's really hazy. Like I was somewhere between 7 and 9 years old. And I don't really remember even how old I
A lot.
was
Yeah.
or anything else that was surrounding it,
Mm.
other than from that point on, that waterfall actually became like, I go back to it for pilgrimages at this point. Um,
Oh, very good, very good.
um,
So would that be your becoming invincible moment in the Gordon White kind of sense of the thing?
Sort of, because later I definitely struggled with ideas of materialism because at that point in time I hadn't really been exposed to them very much, other than that's that thing that those other people think is true and they're wrong, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah,
um,
yeah.
and I struggled with that indoctrination, which meant addressing and thinking about whether materialism and atheism were things that I wanted to consider embracing for myself, right?
Yes.
Because that was I always tried to do honest examinations of whether I wanted to embrace something for myself or not. And at the end, if I just went, well, no, that's not for me, then that's always been okay.
Yeah.
Um, but I never wanted to reject something out of hand because that was the sort of indoctrination that I grew up with, right?
Right. Yes. 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 Yes.
um,
Yeah. So not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, basically.
yeah, didn't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but I also
Yeah.
wanted to give everything a fair shake as much as I could.
Yeah.
Um, which eventually meant coming to terms with being um, queer in various ways because I'm trans and pansexual,
Okay.
and also coming to terms with the fact that magic was something that I wanted as a not just something that I wanted, but something I needed as a part of the way I engage with the broader world to make sure it
Is it
stays.
in a kind of sense of your own kind of sense of self? Is it that magic was as part of that as the other
Yeah,
things? Yeah.
it was never something that I could do without. And that was actually something
Okay.
in my darkest times of depression I was like considering um shifting to materialism triggered depression in me like hugely.
Right.
No matter how I could try and approach it. And so that sense of my being is not complete without some sense of there being magic in the world.
Okay.
Um, so for several years, I was just kind of stubbornly hanging on to that. Like I knew that it was something I needed, but I then didn't like really find magic that resonated hugely with me probably until my early 20s.
Okay.
Um, at which point I wound up with a couple of friends who I was able to talk to about this kind of stuff. Um, and those friends often had regularly really weird experiences. They were the sort of people who like they hadn't like studied particular magical systems, but something about them attracted attention from non-human
Okay.
persons to the
Okay.
extent that sometimes they got in like they had lots of trouble, like cars getting flipped off of
Oh
roads,
wow.
like really intense, crazy stuff that was not attributable to anything physical, but was not stuff they wanted either. Like poltergeist activity that kind of followed them around would be one way of framing it.
Okay.
Um, and I was there for a couple of those experiences. So it was, and they were dabbling in like neo shamanism and stuff like that, but they were also still insistent on maintaining a Christian perspective to an extent that they still do that more than I do.
Okay.
Um,
So at this point, had you kind of left the church you were in? Had you got away from the kind of your parents' influence around that,
yeah,
or what way were you?
not completely, but like, because I've never fully disconnected from that. Well, sort of. It's kind of hard to put into. It's not a categorical yes or no there. I mostly did. I mostly stopped going to church because I never found a church. Like I would occasionally go to a church and be like, are the people here like into the idea of maybe singing hymns in the woods or something?
Right.
Like something a little bit less like boring.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or like a couple times way later in my mid 20s, I attended a Catholic mass with a friend, and that resonated with me because I love the ritual.
Yes.
But I could never like I had too many theological differences with the way Catholicism handles things, right?
Sure. Of course. Of
Um,
course.
which I think many people have had.
Yeah. I think it's
And like
yeah.
this feels it feels magical, but there's all these problems.
It's
So
like Catholicism is great until you look at it. You know what I mean? It looks great from the outside, and then you go, "Oh, you've
yeah.
some really horrible thoughts. You've some really horrible rules." Yeah, yeah,
Exactly. Well, and I had so many friends who came out of it with this like, yeah, no, I was talking to my priest about like what would happen if I like tried to talk to angels directly. They'd be like,
sure.
and the priest would be like, no,
No, don't do
not
that.
okay.
Yeah.
No, don't do that. They'd be like, why not? It
Yeah,
happened.
it's because the priest doesn't believe in the angels and doesn't believe in what he's actually talking most of the time. To be honest.
Yeah, in most cases, it's true. At least not in a sense that they are like actually accessible beings.
Sure, of course. So this neo-shamanism kind of friends that you had got, does this mean that you're going to get into an inevitable pagan kind of era? That you spent your mid-20s as a pagan?
Sort of.
Is it Wiccan? Is it?
Again, I dabbled around the edges of everything and never got directly like engaged. The most engaged I would say, like I got a book, um see, it was the Book of Shadows by Ed Fitch, which are
Okay.
Grimoire of Shadows, Book of Shadows. Anyway, it was one of those Wiccan books, which I read the whole thing, and a bunch of it just seemed really trite to me because I was studying philosophy and religion and mysticism, and it seemed like it was like superficial level. I wanted something deeper than that, right? It's
Yes.
like
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
would probably work for some people, and if you dive into it hardcore, I'm sure there are certain ways that it could work if you were really dedicated to it. But it didn't have enough diversity of thought. Like it seemed like it had gone from a monotheistic perspective to a duotheistic perspective, and I wanted more. I wanted everything to be alive. I wanted everything to be magic.
Yes. Okay.
Um, I wanted all the gods to be real, for better or for worse. um,
So you wanted all the bells and all the whistles.
all the bells and all the whistles. And so I basically just worked on looking at those ideas and incorporating the little bits that seemed like they resonated with me, which has always been sort of how my magical practice worked. Because also in about, I guess I was about 23 or 24, I got the Disinformation Guide to the Occult. Maybe I was a little bit older than that. I'm not sure. My
Okay.
20s are kind of a blur.
Yeah.
Between all of this, like disconnecting from Christianity and the other end of things, which was like the more personal social stuff. Like I wound up with a an abusive spouse for about an abusive wife for about I guess a year and a half in
Okay.
there. Then a lot of like emotional trauma from um, romantic breakups. So
So you did life for a while, basically.
yeah, I did. Well, and all of it is interwoven, but it's also hard because
Of
it's all
course.
just a
Yeah.
huge emotional blur from about 21 or so until I was about 25 or 26 when
Okay.
I decided to finally move out of Missouri um, and move to Orlando,
Okay.
Florida, um, the town of the mouse,
Right.
owned by Disney, basically. It's a really strange place, but that was a really wonderful shift for me because I got to engage with a culture that I surrounded myself with that was more artsy oriented and music oriented and a lot of
And the very opposite of what you came from, basically. Like it's showbiz,
yeah,
razzmatazz, and
yeah, and so that was extremely helpful in me finally putting like the nails in the coffin of my previous cultural attachments.
right, great,
Um,
yeah, yeah,
for the most part, like I said, like just like anything that I will take bits and pieces of, I still retain bits and pieces of Christianity that I think are
sure,
valuable.
yeah.
Just it's less than 5% and it's definitely heretical. So
You took all the
um,
fun bits.
yeah, I took the fun bits as
Yeah,
much as I could.
yeah.
And the bits that made me feel good, right? Like the bits that are comforting. I think people should find whatever resonates with them, right?
Oh, for sure, yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and I dislike the idea of having singular, organized, this is how you should do it systems. Um,
For sure, because that's
so
control instantly. You're getting into control rather than expression.
Yeah, exactly.
So at this point, when you've moved to Orlando and you're surrounding yourself with Mickey Mouse and the likes, and you've more interesting people and stuff like that, is there a practical magic happening yet at any stage? Is there rituals, or
Yeah.
is it all study, or what is it?
It was a little bit before that I got into sigil work.
Okay,
Because I guess it was right just a little bit before I moved to Orlando. Um, but also, the other thing is, like I mentioned, I'd had spirit contact, and part of my process of uh, coming to terms with all of my disconnection from my childhood cultural currents was also realizing that I didn't have the words for it at the time, but at this point I realized it's mediumship
oh,
capability.
okay.
So I had situations where I had other non-human persons who would basically take up residence in my head for periods of time.
Interesting.
Um, and I like tried engaging with it in like other kin stuff was really popular online at the time, and that never resonated because
Okay,
I'm like, this is not
that's
like
not
this
what it
is a
is.
bunch of people.
Yeah.
There were like out of the large numbers of people in those groups, it was like, well, maybe 3 to 5% of you are not play acting and have something actual like weird going on,
Sure. Yeah.
like me, and are just like trying these words on. But for those other people, those words never seem to fit quite. And so, like that, it actually was only a few years ago where I started leveraging mediumship as the term for it because it just finally clicked one day. It was like,
Oh, that's what it
wait,
is.
that's what they call mediumship.
So tell me this: can you explain a bit more about what that actually feels like? Because, like, coming from point of like, I've never experienced that. So, like, what
Yeah.
is that? How? It must have been very scary when you first realized it. Or
Well, sort of. So, like, the first way I actually engaged with it was talking to it as voices in my head in a more like materialist psychology way,
okay,
as multiple personalities.
right,
And I was like, well, this doesn't quite fit because these people are not like part of me.
yeah,
They're from somewhere else. And then I poked at otherkin, and then I was like, you know what? Whatever. I stayed involved in the multiple personality community that I was involved in because it that particular community was just really good for it, right?
right,
They were more accepting of all kinds because they were connected to the budding neurodiversity movement,
okay,
which is basically promoting normalcy of different ways of thinking about things. So saying, hey, I have a diagnosis of autism. I'm not talking for myself, but
yeah,
the community originally came out of the autistic community.
okay,
And them advocating for themselves as that we are not disordered. We have different ways of thinking,
yeah,
and the problem lies with an unaccepting society.
sure,
And a society that's not built to support us.
yes, yeah. So it's like we're atypical rather than something wrong with us.
Yeah. Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. So that was the thing about that community is it really promoted that aspect of engagement with whatever it was about you that made you different from some neurotypical normal,
Right.
whatever normal
Normal
is,
yeah,
right?
sure.
Which is a pretty abstract
Yeah. Bunny ears
which is
all
a
over the
pretty
place.
abstract
Yeah.
concept. Yes, bunny ears all over the place on whatever the hell normal means. Which I'm sure pretty much anybody listening to this
Sure.
understands,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So, and so that was where I found some amount of acceptance, and there were quite a few people in that community who were into magic. I think that's actually where I first started getting into like overtly like chaos magic-y type stuff.
Okay.
And the reason I wound up picking up that disinformation guide to the occult, which is where I got sigils from
Grant Morrison, I assume.
wow, yes, Morrison,
Yes,
thank you.
yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
he wrote the sigils article in that book, I think.
Yeah.
And so I started doing that and had quite a bit of success. So to the point where when I went to Orlando, I was like, if people were having like magical or poltergeist problems, they would like say, "Hey, do you know? Can you do anything about this?" And so I'd like half-ass something with a sigil in a box with like some herbs or
A bit of
something.
sage,
Just kind of
wave it
throw
around.
something to. Well, I didn't do sage, but like I would just something, whatever seemed like it made sense for the specific situation.
Right, okay.
Just kind of intuitively, but with sigils like guiding what it was supposed to do.
Right, oh, very good. That's very good. So, like, sigils as a banishment, kind of, like as a... All right,
Yeah.
very good, very good. Yeah.
Which is not a standard way they get used, right? Like it's pretty
But
uncommon.
why not? Like, I mean, it makes sense when you say it.
But
Like,
yeah, why not?
Yeah,
Well, especially when you're like helping someone else and they don't know how
sure.
sigils work, and you go, look at this thing, focus on it, do whatever you think you need to do to make it come alive in your head, and then we're gonna put this stuff in here, this like magical materia in here to support it,
Sure.
and then like one of them I like taped it to the back of because they were having issues with the household, and they had a central cuckoo clock
Okay.
on their wall that was like a big centerpiece in the home. I was like, let's attach this to the clock. I'll add another sigil that says that this sigil is going to draw its power from time,
Oh, very good, very good.
and then all they'd really have to do to make sure it stayed going was keep the cuckoo clock wound,
Perfect, perfect.
and that worked out pretty well. And so that was the kind of stuff that I was doing, just sort of intuitively making shit up as I went along.
As a proper good chaos magician would.
Yeah, well, it's funny is because I never really got into the chaos magic like community at all.
Right.
But that's definitely always been part of my methodology is just whatever works, throw it at it, right?
Well, that's it. Yeah.
But also because I have the spirit connection, I've also to some extent been able to because there a lot of my like 20s era trauma was also me dealing with like attacks of things that wanted to have undue influence over me.
Sure.
Um,
I think it's interesting that you also went with your first reaction was a kind of a mental health kind of an angle where you're going, maybe this is split personality. Was it the same with the attacks and all the spiritual stuff that you were going, oh, is there something wrong with me? Is that the initial kind of feeling?
that was the initial thing.
Yeah.
I tried engaging with psychology practice. The problem was that sort of stuff, like me talking about it directly, like I talked to a counselor and a psychologist, and they both just kind of sat there like, "What the hell are you?"
Yeah.
Because I wasn't like the way I think in retrospect the way I engaged with them was very like, look, I don't know what's going on, I don't know if you can help me, let me just tell you and you tell me what you think.
Right,
And when I
yeah.
tell them, they would be like, you got some kind of psychosis.
Maybe.
Because it didn't fit into any of their boxes, right?
Yeah,
Like
sure, yeah.
one of them I think was considered, but like also they were kind of like they got like super curious and like were almost fetishizing me, like, ooh, I could do a case study on this person. Like I
Oh
could
yeah,
see
yeah, yeah.
that
Oh,
going
you're
through
super
their
interesting.
heads.
This could help my career.
Yeah, like that was like, and it's like that is you are not the person I need to be talking to.
No,
And I
definitely
never
not.
found somebody to talk to. So eventually I was just like, whatever, I can't find anybody who's not a materialist and seeing all this as uh pure hallucinatory stuff, which I mean, I question that plenty of times
Yeah.
because it seems just like a healthy skeptical way of approaching it,
Oh yeah, for
because
sure.
if you are hallucinating that kind of stuff, do you know? No,
No, yeah.
you wouldn't.
No.
Like what system of judgment do you have if your system of judgment is compromised? So that was another element of the 20s are hard to process and what the hell was going on even. In retrospect, it makes some sense, but at the time, like I had no good frame of reference, and I was just like, whatever works here, whatever works there, throw it all together in a pot. Whether it was mixing in psychological terms and
Was your mood at that point? Was it like because you've talked like were you depressed because of this, or were you kind of going with it, or how were you? Like were you obviously you were functioning on like but it must have been insane, is what I'm saying, in the kind of non
it was, yeah, no,
medical sense of the word.
yeah, no, it was definitely like if talking about it, like if I tell, eventually, I always say I'm eventually going to write an autobiography, and people will be like, "This doesn't make a lick of fucking sense," right? Um,
that's that's the title of it. Doesn't make a lick of fucking sense.
yeah,
A life.
that should be it, honestly. Um, write that down. Doesn't make anyway. Um, I know a publisher's going to take that, but then who would publish that shit anyway? So
Oh, I don't know.
self-publish now,
Well,
right?
you could do it yourself. Yeah, Amazon the whole way.
Yeah.
So you were just kind of being haphazard at this kind of stage, whatever. Did it start becoming into a more coherent thing?
Haphazard isn't the best word
Okay.
because I was going at it like semi-systematically.
Oh,
I just
right,
didn't
okay.
have
Yeah, yeah.
any. I didn't find a good basis until the main core of the thing was coming that started to cohere was coming at it from that multiple personality uh, activist angle, not like the mainstream psychology model of it, but
Right,
the one that was presented that there are all kinds of experiences of what personhood means,
right. Yeah, yeah.
and that's actually fairly normal, and it's very much dependent on any number of factors, right?
Sure.
Whether that is could be spirit contact, could be that you do follow a model that fits with you know with an actual mainstream psychological model because it's that's not something that should be excluded.
Sure.
It just shouldn't be all inclusive,
Right.
right?
Yes,
That
yes,
shouldn't be
yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
only model.
Yeah.
So that was the whole idea. It was basically whatever, like, try different things on, talk to the voices in your head, try and make peace with them.
Right.
If there are ones that are hostile, figure out what's going on there and do your best to resolve it, whatever that takes.
Yeah.
Um, and so this is the time when I wound up first like really coming into contact with the I guess two of my longest running spirit allies at this point, aside from that waterfall patron, which was one of them um, was and is a sort of angel of death figure.
Okay.
Angel is not the best word. Definitely psychopomp is probably
Okay.
better
Right.
because he's but he also has tie-ins to like he has shown me how to in the last couple of years he actually showed me how to summon him in a Solomonic ritual method.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
Um,
Yeah.
so that was it was interesting because like over the course of a couple nights he just was like, here's my proper name.
All right. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And we're going to sit down and you're going to make one of those circle things because I wasn't like a grimoire. I was familiar with it.
Sure.
I'd taken some classes on it through Rune Soup at that point. But it wasn't something that had really resonated with me. But he was like, I need you to do this with me. I was like, okay.
Right.
So I did a bunch of tons of research and wound up coming out with this thing and showed it to some folks on an occult Discord I'm a moderator on. And Sam Block, who runs Digital Ambler website, who has a lot of good stuff, he happened to be on there and he was like, that's a lawman that you've made.
All right.
Here's how you would use it in the context of the art of drawing spirits into crystals, which is one of his personal specialties.
Right.
And so I wound up doing that, and it got contact, and I got results 2 days later that were like, because I asked for results for, give me something that is clearly identifiable with you,
Yes.
but that I won't expect.
Right. 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 Yes.
That
yes.
I
So,
could not predict in any way. But when it shows up, I'll go, holy shit.
so it has to satisfy that I know it's you, but also I wouldn't think of it. Basically, I wouldn't come up
Yeah,
with it. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I did that, and 2 days later, I got dialed up by somebody asking me for help engaging with a certain class of spirits as if they were angels.
Okay.
And it was specifically a psychopompic one.
Okay. Right. Okay.
I don't want to go into that too
Sure, no, that's
specifically
fine.
because it was
Of course, yeah, yeah,
semi-private, but
yeah, yeah.
it was one of those, like, they're basically asking me to call upon my expertise with this person who I just called, this non-human person I just asked for the proof of,
Yeah.
without actually knowing. They didn't know that I was involved with him.
Right, right.
So it was a double level disconnect, and wow,
Yeah.
that was and yeah, that was a pretty noticeable success. I was
Awesome.
like, okay, so this person who I've been engaging with in all these weird ways since I was like 21 or 22, one of the ones who who settled down and we figured out how we could work together, um, is real in some sense, right?
Right.
Um, which was interestingly one of the first like serious confirmations that that mediumship thing was not purely my imagination, right?
Right. Yes. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Or some kind of psychosis, was that it had this exterior. But I mean, I went, I guess, 15 years engaging with it just on its face and being like, well, we're going to work with this as healthily as we can. So sometimes it takes a long time to actually figure out what the hell's going on with these things.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. And I suppose the kind of thing as well. There's the thought that because you kind of touched on this kind of animism thing of like personhood, like what is a person, what is, and the thing you've saying, like that I was talking to this person who was real in some sense, and like there's that the whole kind of wide gamut of understanding of personhood, and it's an interesting type thing that we kind of seem to want to pigeonhole or condense or put in a box. This is a person. That's not a person. You know what I mean? And it's a thing that that probably, well, it's ultimately wasn't helpful for you in your life at all because that's not what was your experience of it.
Yeah, I basically had to. I didn't have a way, and that's kind of the thing. Is like when Gordon talks about those moments of invincibility. For me, it was more. It wasn't an, oh, this is real. It was a, I can't avoid. I can't even think in terms that this is not real anymore. Right.
Right.
Like,
Yes. Yeah.
it was the shift from going, well, I'm going to believe this because I'm engaging with it in some sense, but I'm going to try and maintain a distance from it and I still try and be skeptical of it because it's still very healthy, but it's the moment of unavoidable, can't get around it. This is not me.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
And that's what that was for me. Um, but also I'd been effectively doing magic and intellectually was invincible. I just wasn't invincible in that like deep mystical sense of,
Of it. Yes.
yeah, it's all
Yeah.
hugely real down on levels that aren't just word based, right?
So where did you find RuneSoup then? Where does that come in the story? Because you mentioned them, you did the GRIMOIRE course, obviously at that point.
Oh, yeah. Gordon's stuff came in because I had kind of gone in waves as to how much I was trying to engage with magic directly, because like I had the sigils thing going on. Sometimes I'd do that. Sometimes I'd go a year without, maybe. Probably more
Okay.
like 6 or 8 months. But
Yeah.
um, because I met my spouse about, I guess, 7.5 years ago, and they are they were coming at things from kind of a more Wiccan neo-pagan type of perspective,
Okay.
but also were somewhat they were somewhat dissatisfied with that.
Okay.
And so we had talked about how we talked for like a year or two over the course of, dating and getting married. And it was kind of started probably around the time we had a miscarriage.
Okay.
That we started being like, we really need to actively engage with this stuff because it's really healthy for us. And we've kind of been just lazily going along, not just in life, but just not just magically, but in life in general. But we decided we kind of needed to re-engage more healthily with life as a whole because that trauma experience was very eye-opening as far as like we really needed to do more with our lives.
Was it more of a case of like to stop life happening to you, like to take the reins of life back? Was it like stop just, you know,
It was more emotionally,
right?
actually. It was
Okay,
more being like, we need this on a deep spiritual level. We haven't been, and part of why we're having such a difficult time processing this event is because we have been ignoring our own like spiritual magical health. Like the
okay,
two are pretty intertwined for me, spirituality and magic. Like
yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, I can't really say where one begins and one ends.
Same for me.
But yeah, and so we both started kind of pursuing that in our own different ways. And for me, because we wound up having another child and moving, and me getting a more stable job where I was doing data entry. Because before that, I'd been delivering pizzas, finishing up an anthropology degree in college.
Okay,
The second time I went to college, um, and so uh, when I started doing that data entry job for the state, I I had tons of time to listen to podcasts.
okay.
So I just started binging crap tons of magical podcasts. I was like, eventually something's gonna really ring for me. And I had a few things that kind of did. Some of the druidry stuff kind of felt good, and some
Okay.
of the witch stuff kind of felt good if it was a little less Gardnerian and more get down in the dirt and work with bones and stuff. Because
Right, right, right.
that's the kind of witch stuff that I like to do.
So a bit more hoodoo, I suppose.
Well, not exactly. I mean, it's more like because it's definitely coming out. It's not. It's a European oriented tradition
Okay.
that most of those people are coming at it from, because most of them are of European ancestry. But uh, and I mean, for me, I mixed it with a lot of uh, mythological. Because I mean, I've studied the hell out of tons and tons of myth worldwide. So and like that was my focus in my anthropology degree. So um, and like the first time I was in school, I was doing like comparative religion
Right, right, right,
studies
right, right.
basically.
But basically, what you're saying is you have a very eclectic approach, but the older you got and the more you went through, it became a bit more refined and a bit more focused, even though it still has its
Yes.
eclecticism at heart, kind of thing. It's like it's not one
Yeah.
way; it's
Exactly.
all the ways, but with focus. I said not haphazard. There's a system to it. It's just not a defined
Well,
system, I
and
suppose.
well, and I mean, I could go on for hours and hours trying to define my system, but the thing
Sure.
is, my system is so complex that it defies simple explanation, right?
Right. Yeah.
Because I could dive into the metaphysics hardcore and explain how everything works the way I think of it.
Right.
Not trying to say that anybody else should think of it that way, but why it works for me, I can explain in depth,
Yeah.
extensively. Um, but that's gonna bore most people.
If someone asks you and it's your elevator pitch, I suppose. How do you describe yourself now? Like what like is it? Would you say chaos magician? Do you say witch? Do you what's
I
the
usually go
description?
with witch. There are so many words that are they're all both overly simplified and have so much cultural baggage
Sure.
that I tend to say that I am a magical practitioner who pulls from a lot of traditions.
Okay.
And
Okay.
if I have to stick with a label, I go with witch because to me, I go with a little bit of an older definition of witch than most people, which is that it's someone who is on the margins of society and engages with the more than human world directly and intuitively in some sense,
Yes.
right?
That's it. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and that can mean working with plants, or that can mean working with, you know, Goetia demons. It can mean your Sabrina thing where you
Hmm.
go and sign your name in a book. It can
Sure.
mean meeting Hecate or any other spirit at the crossroads, um, who happens to be a crossroads oriented spirit. Um,
Yeah. No point looking for spirits that aren't at the crossroads.
yeah. But the whole idea is that it's engaging with uh, levels of consciousness that are not exclusively human, right?
Right.
Um,
So would you be working well, not exclusively, or is it the spirit model is what your world is, your magic is based in? Is it's not? Is that the foundation?
Mostly.
Okay.
I still sometimes leverage some energy talk,
Okay.
but most of that to me is speaking more towards like that. Do I have enough energy to do this thing today? Right.
Right. Right.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
if I take that and then apply like a kind of classical energy, 5 elements model or something, 4 or 5 elements, then that gives me a metaphor that I can use for it. But I think of it as a metaphor, not as because I mean, it's all metaphor
Sure. Yeah.
ultimately.
Yeah.
We're
Yeah.
trying to use symbolic language to discuss things that don't neatly fit into symbolic language, into concrete language. So it's important to maintain that realization that we're not talking about uh, things that fit into concrete word boxes, right?
Sure. Of
Um,
course. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and that we're talking with symbol and metaphor a lot, and poetic uh, perspectives. So it's trying to remember where the actual question was there.
Oh, just more like what your, I suppose, the model of magic you would reside in mostly. But I mean, it's a redundant question in that why does it have to be any? It can be all these things. But
Well, and the other thing is, why can't an energy have a spirit, or why can't a spirit be energy too? Like,
yes,
is
yes, yeah,
electricity? Because like so much of the energy model is based off of language that came about when electricity became popular,
yes,
and
yes, yes,
the
yes.
the historical overlap between electricity becoming a thing that was cool and widely used, and the like Golden Dawn and early Wicca
Yeah,
and uh, all that stuff. I mean, plenty of them also have spirit models of
of course.
engagement,
Yeah,
but a
yeah,
lot
yeah.
of the language for the energy models, the more neo-pagan energy models, come out of that, or come out of kind of a poor understanding of Hindu or Buddhist practice.
Right. Yes,
Uh,
yes, yes. Like a bad sense of chi. Yeah.
yeah, that sense of chi or whatever, and kind of flattening them into this idea of energy, which I think that it's more useful to go, what is even the difference,
Right.
right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
We use the language that clicks the best with us, um, but it's important to be able to talk sideways and recognize that your model shouldn't be exclusive, right? And there may be more than one model at play and actively true at the same time. Because I don't subscribe to uh, a model of truth and knowledge as being exclusive. I think uh, contradictory truths can be true.
Sure. Yes, yes.
I don't
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah.
think I'm pretty non-fact based because I'm very suspicious of the very idea of facts.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. There's those pesky, suspicious facts. I understand.
yeah, I'm suspicious. Yeah, because whenever somebody starts presenting something like it's fact,
Yes. Yeah. Or capital T
it's
truth.
almost always
Yeah.
yeah, or capital T truth. It's like,
Yeah.
well, let's dig into this a
Yeah.
little.
Let's see where
What
this is
is
going.
yeah? So where is this actually going with your model of things? Um, and that the thing I always like to throw at people is like people are like, well, how do you even define what's real then? And I'm like, well, do you use money? Is
Yeah.
money
Wow. That's it.
real?
Real.
Scare
Yeah.
quotes.
Yeah.
Like, what the hell is money? It's a symbol that we pass around a physical or even a non-physical, obviously a
Yeah.
digital and
Yes.
energetic
Yeah.
uh, iteration of, and it's all imaginary stuff, but it's very real because it has a huge impact on our lives.
The most real thing we have is money, and it's
It's
the
like
most
one of the
unreal
most
thing we have.
universally real things,
Yeah.
yes. And I think one of the reasons why people have such a hard time talking about money and like engaging with it in healthy ways is because people aren't thinking about it as basically a magical object.
Oh yeah,
Because money is
exactly. Yes.
magic.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
money is like one of the reasons why our system works the way it does in the like Western uh, post-colonialist system is because of way that the way that money and magic engage with those cultural systems is predominantly unhealthy. I don't think it has to be,
Right.
um, but it's definitely leveraged as a tool of power, right? And a magical
For
tool of
sure.
power.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, because what better way to change the way someone feels about their life than to manipulate their financial situation,
Absolutely.
right?
Like, or the control. It's immediate. Like, it's
Yeah,
you
no.
you control someone by controlling their finances. Like, there's no
Yeah.
question of it. Like.
Yeah, so and I mean that's like we see how much money is a control system for politics and it's it's just obvious, it's a no-brainer. But when you start thinking of that in money is a magical thing and also that money is a non-human person. It has
Yes.
some kind of a personhood that probably varies a bit based on which country is issuing it, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but it definitely like if you look at the way it works, like it kind of has a mind of its own the way it flows through economies. Like some of that's predictable, but most economists, like good economists, I think, are the ones who are like, yeah, well, a lot of this is
Yeah.
only kind of predictable.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
About as predictable as,
Yeah.
a person. So you can
Yeah.
kind of know how a person works and how they're going to operate, but they can always surprise you. Um,
Very much so. Yeah, very much so. I suppose it's similar in a sense. The other kind of one that's similar to that is the idea of fashion, which is kind of it has the same kind of feel to it in that it's you can somewhat you can influence it, you can set in a direction, but sometimes it just does its own thing, and it's
yeah.
like has that kind of
It's like, why the hell is this popular right now? Why are
yeah
why
yeah
are
yeah
pogs? I don't know if pogs were ever a thing in the probably not. They were a really weird early '90s thing in the U.S. Pogs were originally like a paper seal for milk jugs.
oh okay
That
because we
the
need
milk.
that.
Yeah, well, I mean, we did at the time. It was
Right,
like,
okay.
um, well, actually, we didn't at that point in time. That was the funny thing is it was a throwback to like the '70s when or the '60s or the '70s or something when they were actually a thing for sealing glass milk jugs.
Right,
You'd
right,
have
right,
a little paper cardboard disc in there, and then first for whatever bizarre reason, people decided to market them as a collector's item in the
oh
early
wow,
90s.
right.
Like it's completely incomprehensible when you look. I mean, sure, I'm sure people have written stuff about the history of why Pogs became a thing, but when you think about it in the terms of the overarching cultural, like what the hell, man? Why did that even?
Well, that's it. But that's I suppose the nature of the Black Swan incident that
Yeah.
Nassim Taleb talks about. It's exactly that. That
Mm.
there's you cannot predict the Black Swan. That's just it. And it's the thing that is the most, I suppose, culturally powerful and changing kind of thing that can come along. But it's an interesting one, yeah. That there's magic is so prevalent in the world, in the kind of particularly like with regards to say fashion and money, but yet no one believes it. No one believes it's a
Yeah,
thing.
it's weird. Well, and it's because I think part of it is because it's been like those elements have been rendered so mundane that people can't
Yes,
see them with an enchanted vision because that's part of why they are
it works.
that's part of why they work the way they do in society is because it advantages someone somewhere for people to not think and a lot of it goes back to exploitative colonialism because
Of
you
course.
could say like the original it went from saying well we can take this land from these people because they're not Christians and they're not really humans, right? um,
Right.
and so we can go out and take their land with a flag even though they've been living on it for 1,000 years.
Yeah.
um,
But I have a
and
flag.
yes.
Have you a flag?
Do you have a flag?
Yeah.
Yes. Um, and that's definitely like mundane magic of evil, right? Like,
Yes. Yeah.
like I don't generally use the E word, evil of things, but like when you're talking about exploiting and abusing and enslaving other people, that's evil by
That's
my
kind of the
book,
word for
right?
it. Yeah. I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, um, it's it's one of those things like they do and that shifted into materialism because then you could be like well you guys don't really know what you're talking about because and that's the kind of like banality of like American neoliberalist atheism of well these people are kind of all idiots because they believe God exists and that spirits are real
Yeah.
so we'll just dismiss their opinions entirely. which to
Yeah,
some
because we're
extent
super
their
smart and
opinions
we
are
know all the
dumb, but
answers.
they yeah, exactly. It doesn't mean they know all the answers either because it's just
Yeah,
a
yeah,
tool of power, right? Um,
yeah.
and lots of people really get into it, and like I don't judge people for feeling that or for thinking in those ways. I just think of it as a tool of power because so many of those things are like just
Sure.
by their very nature, if something can exercise significant influence on the population writ large, somebody's going to try and use it for that, right? So,
Of course.
mass media, all that stuff, there's all kinds of, I think, magical control mechanisms going on. I don't think it's necessarily like intentional, like conspiracy magic. I mean, in some cases, maybe it is, but probably a lot of it's just people
Oh, I'm
doing
sure there
things
has to be, but I
instinctively.
don't.
Yeah, I'm sure it
Yeah.
happens.
I'm sure there's no grand big conspiracy.
Yeah, I'm sure there's also a lot of just people. Yeah, there's no, I don't see like there being a giant Illuminati conspiracy that does everything, but I totally see small conspiracies and also see people just doing fucking marketing, right? And
Yes, yes,
marketing
yes,
is a kind of
exactly. Yes,
magic. Um,
yes, it is.
changing people's minds based on advertisements they see, like how it's weird to me to think of it in terms that aren't magical, right?
Yes, yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
and that's like all this is part of why like because when I hit that podcast, when I hit Rune Soup, which was funny because it was because Gordon was on some kind of neo-pagany uh, podcast that I kind of liked
Right. Okay.
because it had some druid folks on it periodically. But he was on there promoting chaos protocols, and I was like, I like a lot of what this guy's saying. It fits with a lot of what I think already.
Right. Yes. Yes. Yes.
So, and it's like I've got probably about I don't know, 60% Venn overlap with how I see the world with Gordon. Um,
Okay.
but then like that other 40%, I'm like, Gordon, pull your head out of your ass, man. I love him. I love him to death.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
I'm not. I don't actually think he should pull his. I just think everybody has those moments, right? And then also
But
there's
I think it's 60% Venn overlap with anyone is pretty good going. I mean, that's
yeah,
pretty good.
really.
Yeah, yeah. Just tell me this: how does your
Yeah.
what does magic look like to you today? What are you doing? What's your practice? What's what
Gotcha.
is the current kind of contemporary Kelsie magic?
The current contemporary Kelsie magic, besides being buried up to my eyeballs in it the last like 6 months or so, um, is partly getting my tarot business off the ground. I do
Okay.
tarot readings online, and I'm just launching a website. This show is kind of my, as you know, this show is kind of my hard deadline of like I've been trying to get up the mental oomph to build a damn website for the last month and a half, but have had all these other crazy intense magical experiences coming down
So
because I
did you say intense magical excuses maybe,
yeah,
or
yeah,
is it?
magical excuses. That's a great way of putting it. But the funny thing is, they're all interrelated. Like I did an actual pact back at the end of October, um, which was for money and to help
Okay.
me actually like expand my ability to have wealth so that I can use it ethically to help other people around me because I was like I'm very helping other people oriented. Like
Okay.
I love doing tarot readings. Like I part of why I poked at psychology was because I wanted to help other people uh, address similar issues of being outsiders and feeling like they were too weird for mainstream culture. But then I wasn't going to be able to do that and confront a materialist psychiatric establishment simultaneously. I just
Yes.
wasn't going to have the energy for
Yeah.
it. So that was why I didn't wind up pursuing that. But I love helping other people, and I'm very helping other people oriented. And I had sort of this series of events that made me go because I was doing a lot of Saturn oriented work, setting my own boundaries so
Okay.
that I could be organized and get shit done because I have a horrible
Okay.
issue with I have very diverse interests. I get my attention does not stay on focus very well.
Okay.
Um,
Okay.
as the conversation may have displayed to people.
That's fine. That's fine.
But yeah, I mean,
We
in a
should have invoked
podcast,
Saturn at the beginning of it to
in
keep
a
us on
yeah,
track,
yeah,
perhaps.
in a podcast that's kind of fun usually. But in other
Yeah,
contexts,
it is.
like if I'm sitting around talking about magic on Discord, on the various Discord channels that I'm involved in, uh, it's uh, it's easy to talk a lot about it and get fall down too many rabbit holes and have too many things that are interesting to me. Um,
Yes, yeah, yeah.
I've gotten into astrology just enough to know that for me, the way I needed to lean into that was to engage with Saturn as some kind of an archetype of Saturn. And
Okay.
that process led me to a reexamination of wealth. And so I was working with, doing some deep internal work on changing my relationship because if money and wealth are tools, magical tools, then it's not good to just considering how they are like the basis, how that's the basis for how our society works
Yeah,
so much.
yeah.
It's like I can't afford to not engage with them, right?
Sure, sure.
I'd
Yeah, yeah.
spent years and years basically being dirt poor and just scraping by, and I'd use my magic to scrape by when I needed to, but I would never really address it in a way that was like, because I developed this underlying resentment of money as this oppressive tool, and I realized it's not monolithic. Like you can totally use it to help other people, right? But it's so easy to
Yeah.
fall into that. And so I was doing this work with setting my own boundaries, and for the purpose of expanding my capabilities of actually maybe getting to where, because we're doing some permaculture homesteading here,
Nice.
which ironically we started just before Gordon started his. I'm always like, Gordon, you're copying me
Yeah.
on everything.
The
Um,
original. I'm the original. I was permaculturing before you were
I'm
permaculturing.
well. The funny thing was, like, I got into it because he was talking about it so much, but he
Sure.
was
Yeah.
still in London and
Yeah.
wasn't
Yeah. Yeah.
actually
Yeah.
doing it, right? And then I'm like, okay, well, I'm gonna go buy myself 3 acres, which took a lot of fucking magic,
I can
given
imagine.
that how broke we were. And it was pretty obviously magical results because of the bizarre ways that it happened. Like
Right.
people, anyway, that is another story.
Okay.
But part of that is we want our place to be a place where people can come and learn about herbalism because my spouse is really hugely into herbalism.
Okay.
We want to be able to sell our products at farmers markets and
Excellent.
that be one of our main revenue streams for the household. And we want to get to where, and I love doing cartomancy for people,
Yes.
um, because it's a way of, I can help people in the ways that counseling can,
Yes.
but in a way that counseling can't. Does that make
Sure.
sense?
Yes.
Like,
Absolutely sense.
not
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
the ways counseling can by any means. Like, it's not like
Yeah.
it's a replacement, but it's like there's
Sure.
some overlap there in the middle, and then there's all this stuff that you can do readings for people that goes way beyond obviously anything you're going to get in an office somewhere. So
So it's kind of again going back to your christening. You took the bits you like, you took the shiny bits, and
yeah,
you put them into
yeah,
into a way that works for you, which is very cool.
yeah,
Very cool.
yeah. And I'm being and the Saturn work was forcing me to realize that not only did I need to systemize my time use, which is like an intense struggle, as witness the fact that I only got my website up last night. Um,
At least you got it
the
up. At least you got it up. You
Yeah, I
got there.
did. I'm
Yeah.
actually I had the breakthrough of this is actually looking like it's gonna work at like 1 a.m.
All right.
Um,
Okay.
but see, obviously, I still need to work on time management, and that's going to be a lifelong process for me. I can tell because it's a
Yeah.
seriously, it's a personal weakness. I'm happy to admit that because it lets me grow and do better at it.
It's a weakness. It's a weakness for everyone, though. Like time. We're in
Yeah,
a world. We're in a dimension where time is the most precedenting thing, I suppose. Like it's a thing
yeah,
that we have to be most
more
aware
than
of.
money.
Yeah. Yeah. Indeed. So I will put all your links and your stuff in the show description and all of those things where people can find you. But is there anything you would like to say before we go? Is there any parting wisdom or anything you would like to mention?
I think it's extremely good to examine thought processes surrounding. I mean, I'm very much an unexamined life. I wouldn't say is not worth living, but I think it's much less magical and much less
Yeah.
enchanted. And my favorite quote that I stick, probably corny, probably kind of corny as a quote, but is the Hamlet line that to Horatio right after he's seen and interacted with his father's ghost is there's more things in heaven and earth than are dreamt of in your philosophy.
Yeah.
And I think that's a thing to sit and think with whenever you're talking about how you engage with the world, especially in a magical context, because it's one of those, it's so easy to get in a, well, this process that I'm using is the right one. It's much more useful, I think, and helpful to sit and think with how they are going to be inherently more complex than you think they are,
Yes.
and how there are probably ways of addressing them that are useful that you would never think of or that actually seem foreign to you. So it also helps, with a sense of acceptance of other people's practices and not being like, well, you're doing that wrong, right?
Yeah.
I hate it when people start
Yeah, I get
bagging
that.
on other people's practices
Yeah.
because if they're doing something and it's working for them, then great. If it's not working for them, then be like, well, if it's not working for you, then here are some other ideas. But
Sure. Yeah,
it doesn't mean they're doing it wrong, unless it's wrong for them in that moment, right?
Yeah.
So
Exactly that. So I think what you're saying is, be cool, kids.
yeah, be cool with each other. The only thing to kind of like be hostile to is other people being assholes, right?
That's it, and that's a totally worthwhile endeavor, and justified. I feel just the justification in that.
To some extent. I mean, sometimes the thing that an asshole needs is somebody being like, "Look,
Yeah.
we love you.
Yeah.
Stop it."
Stop it. Yeah. That's it. Kill them with kindness.
Or do you need to talk to me? Do we need to sit down and talk this? I'm totally open to talking because it sounds like you're struggling. But then obviously some people are just past a point where they're going to be able to listen, and then you're just like, okay, you are not worth spending time on.
Yeah.
So.
And then we ask the spirits to let us know which people we are dealing with. So I suppose in the given moment.
Yeah, exactly.
That's it.
Oh no, I was just gonna say it's funny. I'm working on a ritual that is related to my the pact spirit that I've been working with, and eventually that's gonna be on my website here in the next few weeks. I'm
Great
trying to
stuff.
set myself a soft deadline of Lupercalia because I have some other practitioners who want to use it in regards to Lupercalia.
Okay.
But and that's literally going to be something that it's part of the intention behind that ritual and why this is forefront in my head is that spirit wants the ritual to be as open to personal interpretation as possible, which is an interesting challenge, right?
Yes.
To make it poetic enough that it will engage with people's imaginal interests, and then also be something that there's not a clear right and wrong way of interpreting it so that people can take it and leverage it how they need to in their own lives. So just a little tease for a little ritual thing that it will be published on my site here within the next month on the outside. So
Awesome. I think there'll be a better chance of that happening if you don't already give your excuse of a soft deadline. How about a hard deadline of it has to be done?
You're right. I should say that's 1 week though. It's so complicated.
Do it.
Oh my gosh.
Don't panic.
I should just make it hard. I mean, it worked for getting the website up. So
yeah, that's it. Yeah.
making this podcast the hard deadline for getting the podcast up worked. It was stressful last night, but it's totally worth it. And it's been a very wonderful conversation. So
I really enjoyed it, and we must definitely do it again. Well, good luck with the website, and good luck with the cartomancy, and good luck with being the original gangster with the permaculture and all of these things. And enjoy the rest of your weekend, and we will do this again soon. Thank you very much, Kelsie.
you too, Tommy.